Right. Good morning, everybody. As the slide suggests, I'm Mike Wilson. I'm actually Professor of Drama at Falmouth University and also the Dean of Research and the Graduate School there. As Chloe suggested, one of my main areas of research is around storytelling, and over recent years I've become particularly interested in the everyday stories that people tell each other and how those might have an application in terms of making available lay knowledge into a policy context, and particularly the way that the digital technologies and the internet has made available lay knowledge to us in ways that otherwise previously wasn't available. So it's kind of redrawn the balance between lay knowledge, folk knowledge if you like, and expertise. So I was just going to talk for about 10 minutes about some of the work that I've been doing over the past few years in this area, and to show you an example or two as well, so you're not always having to listen to my voice as well. So for me, this whole thing started when I was working in Wales, and my Pro-Vice Chancellor at the time was an engineer, a structural engineer working in disaster zones. And his job was about designing buildings for earthquake zones. And I didn't know this at the time, but apparently if you're designing buildings for earthquake zones, you can do two things. You can either build really robust buildings that won't fall down, or you build really flimsy buildings that will fall down, but fall down really easily and really safely. And he said to me, I've been hearing a lot about storytelling at the moment. Do you think storytelling has a role within disaster management? And if you say yes, I'll give you some money. And I said yes, and then went away and thought about what role it might have. So we did some work, a little project in Tewkesbury, which, as you'll remember, underwent floods some years ago. And in fact, those flood events in, I think it was 2007, were actually not their first flood events, of course. They've been having flood events every 10, 15, 20 years for as long as anybody can remember. And there's a huge amount of knowledge within those communities about how you cope with flood, how you recover from flood, how you prepare for flood. So we did some work making some digital stories with them about their flood experiences. And this came by a very circuitous route to the attention of some of the guys in the Department of Energy and Climate Change, specifically in their communications department. And they said to us, we've got a little bit of a problem, and our problem is this. Three problems, they said, we've got. First of all, we spend an awful lot of money on campaigns that are around raising climate change awareness. But it seems that the more that we do, the less impact it has. So it actually seems to be doing exactly the opposite that we want it to do. There's an increase in disengagement or skepticism from the issues, even though we're putting increasingly large amounts of money into the campaigning. The second thing they said was, we think this may have something to do with the fact that our communications policy is largely based on a top-down, expert-driven climate change science plan that actually makes it very difficult for people to engage with, because, of course, as we all know, the climate change science is very, very complicated, and unless you have some quite advanced level of scientific understanding, it's difficult to grasp the full import of the science. And they felt that this was putting people off, this top-down approach. They were also concerned that they weren't engaging with people. What they told us was that they found that about 20% of the population were engaging in climate change debates. They were either the 10% who, like most of us here, in fact probably all of us here today, are very enthusiastic about getting involved in that debate and trying to do something about it, Then there are the 10% who are either skeptical about climate change or even deniers. And there's 8% in the middle who literally, no pun intended, blow a bit hot and cold on the issue, really. So they define this 80% as being hard to reach. And it struck me that if 80% of the population is hard to reach, then you might have a communications problem. So they said, would you have a go at using storytelling? So we designed a little project that it was about was trying to use storytelling, particularly digital storytelling, so stories captured in a digital format and placed online as a way of trying to reframe the climate change conversation publicly to get more people engaged in that, working with communities that previously weren't engaged in that conversation. So we worked in a range of communities. We worked in West Cornwall, we worked in Regen in South Wales, and we worked in inner city London. So we were looking at metropolitan areas, rural areas, small urban provincial areas, and we were working with youth groups right the way through to pensioner groups, to an Irish women's centre, a whole range of different kinds of people. And we made 18 digital stories, which were then used in workshops as a starting point, as a catalyst for further storytelling and conversation. And what I want to do, because time is limited, is that I just want to show you one of the stories that we made, one of the stories that we collected.
My name is Heather Rogers, and I've been living and farming here with my family since they moved in 1948, and I was born a few years later, and apart from going to college, I've been living in Ellisvere ever since. So now we just have beef breeding cows and their young stock. So it's all grassland, and we make silage in round bales. Basically, I think I always thought I'd work on the farm because when I was a little girl, my greatest delight was to go out with my father, and whatever he was doing, I'd be his shadow, I think. I think my favourite job when I was a young girl was when we were lambing. If we had any orphan lambs, my job was to help feed them. And that often meant helping myself as well to the milk. We used to keep them around the corner in our neighbour's meadow, and as soon as I got around the corner, I got a picture of me in there now with my little bonnet on up the top of the camping field. I think that was taken in the snow. I keep a daily diary. I kept a diary ever since I came back from college when I was 21, but my mother kept a diary when we were little. I write what we do every day because the memory's getting more cloudy, and always a weather report. And I only looked up the other day, and this would apply to this spring, and we actually had hotter days on the 19th of February and March than we had on the 19th of July, which makes no sense whatsoever. Fine weather at the right time of growing your crops and rearing your animals is vital, because if you have it too dry and hot in the spring, your crop yields are down, and also if you don't grow grass in the spring, animals are affected and you don't have the winter fodder. If we have too hot a weather, it seems to soon become a problem. Do you know what I mean? Your grassland or your crops, they seem to be stressed out quickly. Over the last few decades, we've noticed that we have more extremes of weather. You used to be able to rely on fine weather in the summer to make hay, but now we seem to get either extremely heavy rain or extremely windy or extremely hot spells of weather, and likewise milder winters than you used to have. So we don't seem to have definite seasons now. They're not defined like they used to be. Consequently, I think there is a definite change in growing patterns. Probably the last 20 years, I think we've seen bigger changes.
as you probably realise there, Heather farms on the farm that's been in the family for many generations down in West Cornwall overlooking Mounts Bay. That story was the story out of all the stories that we made that had the greatest impact amongst the community groups that we worked with. Heather's voice was the voice that people trusted most, they found most credible, most authentic, and having a degree of expertise within there. However, Heather's voice is not the kind of voice that is very often heard within climate change policy debates, for all kinds of reasons. It's a heavily accented voice for a start. It's a voice that is perhaps even unschooled, you might say. But she's truly an expert. She's an expert of her own life and her own experiences. And she's also something of a proto-citizen scientist, I would argue, with her daily diary keeping, just as her mother has done before. And one of the things I think we learnt from this work is that storytelling has a number of potential applications in this field. Principally, though, it brings new voices into the debate. It means new voices into the arena, and that can only be a good thing, especially when those voices are very credible voices. They're a voice of what I might call a new expertise, although you could also call it a very old expertise as well, of course, but new to the arena, if you like. The other thing it does is bring personal experience into the debate as well, and that is critical for engaging people, and particularly in an area that is characterised and dominated by quite high level scientific debate. This kind of information, this kind of knowledge doesn't replace the science, of course it doesn't, but what it does, it can maybe add texture to some of the scientific knowledge, and it's very useful, very important for engaging people in those kinds of debates. So I would argue that actually storytelling, certainly storytelling enhanced by technology, brings a new kind of authority and a new kind of expertise into an area that is incredibly important and could be in all kinds of policy areas. And it was very interesting that as a result of this, and we gave a presentation in Whitehall at DEC, we got an invitation to go and talk to colleagues in the Cabinet Office. And one very wet November evening, I was in the Cabinet Office talking to quite senior civil servants from not only the places you might expect, like DEC and DEFRA, but also from the Home Office, from the Foreign Office, for the Department of Work and Pensions, from a number of government departments. And it struck me that 4 or 5 years ago, first of all, I would never have been invited to go and talk about storytelling to civil servants in Whitehall, but even if I had, nobody would have bothered turning up. So it struck me that some of this work perhaps catches a resonance to some of the challenges we're facing in terms of democratic participation at the moment. There's a bit of a crisis in active citizenship, characterised, I suppose, by low voter turnouts, but government, civil service are looking for new ways to engage people. And my argument would be that listening to people's stories are ways of bringing those voices into the arena and enhancing and enriching the debate about some of these key issues that we're all interested in.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. My name's Emily. I'm from Dorset. I wondered how you measured the effectiveness of the message.
Oh, that's a really good question. The way that we measured them in two main ways. One obvious way, and actually for me a very unsatisfactory way, was that we had all the stories up on our own YouTube channel. So we had a very good way of measuring their impact in the sense of how many views that the stories had. It's a very crude way, and one that I find very unsatisfying in a way, but Heather's story was the only story that we put up that had enough views for us to get an email from YouTube asking if we wanted to monetize it by adding advertising to it. And needless to say, we politely declined that offer. But I think the real measure of impact is the stories that story generated. Because although that is Heather's story, the full story is what people said about it, or the stories that they added to that. So we would show these stories in workshop situations. And what we were observing was the stories that people told in response, and the debates that people had, the conversations that people had in response to the stories that we were showing them. And Heather's was the one that had the most impact. Likewise, we showed the stories, of course, to our colleagues in DEC as well, and they unanimously responded to Heather's story more than the others. So there was something about that particular story that seemed to be pushing buttons with both the community we were working with, but also some of our partners in the project as well.
Very interesting. Stephen Frankel from Weybridge. Stories often have some kind of implicit action or even explicit action within them. Could you give some sense of what sort of actions people were either implying or talking about in terms of their narratives?
It ranged really. To give you a sense of the range of people we had making these stories, we had farmers like Heather. We had a guy who goes around installing solar panels, and he was telling us of his experience. We had some surfers who talking about their experiences of climate change on their ability to surf, or certainly surf in good waters. We had people who were involved who'd installed things like wind turbines within their houses, and somebody who was involved in sustainable tourism, someone who was involved in a kind of guerrilla gardening project as well. So it was a very broad range of people. I suppose each particular story, you're right, had an implicit or even an explicit call to action. Now, what we were very keen to do here was not to use the stories as vehicles for messages, as a kind of propaganda. And one of the discussions we were constantly having with DEC was they would say, this is a great story, what we could do that is use it in this campaign about this. And we were constantly having to say to them, that may be the case, but that's not really the purpose of what we're doing here. What we're trying to do is get a conversation going. So if there is a call for action, in a sense, as far as I was concerned anyway, the call for action was a call for conversation, a call for engagement, which may, one would hope then, hopefully lead to some kind of behaviour change, positive behaviour change. But,
I thought that if you started to talk about storytelling, you might have been talking about creative fiction, but you are mainly focusing on factual, documentary storytelling. Is there a role, do you see, for creative writing?
Absolutely. Yes, I mean, you're quite right. What this work was focused on was around everyday personal experience stories. But it's important, I think, to remember that storytelling itself isn't just about looking backwards. It's not simply about retelling and recreating the past. What storytelling does is allow us also to imagine a future that we want. So in terms of kind of certainly the creative writing field is a great vehicle for trying to narratize our futures, if you like, and I think that's a very good example. Yeah.
Mike, thank you so much for your time and for coming to talk to us in what you've actually turned out to be a really noisy space.
That's all right. Good. Well, thank you very much.